Hello and welcome, therefore, to the Global Gateway session on critical raw materials. Thank you very much for your interest. And we can already say that we're going to be talking later on, and we'll be hearing all the speeches on the Global Gateway projects underway and critical raw materials strategic partnerships. We'll be discussing many, many questions. My name is Conny Schimmoch. I'm not going to take you through what we have planned because time is of the essence. And ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce our first keynote speaker, let me just give one quick quote from Ursula von der Leyen from her State of the Union speech this summer. She said the European Green Deal was born out of necessity to protect our planet, but it's also designed as an opportunity to preserve our future prosperity, and that worldwide. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and the pleasure both to say welcome to the Prime Minister of the DRC, who's just arrived. And sir, maybe you want to take a breather, and let me introduce the DG of the WTO first. Now we have the wonderful opportunity to listen to Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Wonderful that you're here. Wonderful that you're taking the time. And you have, in recent publications and in recent speeches, created a new word. And the word is reglobalization. I think that's a wonderful invention for what we're talking about, globalization 2.0 or whatever number you want to have. And let me quote to everybody else, because you might not have known it, that you have said globalization 2.0 or reglobalization is a better pathway to resilience, a pathway that, as you mentioned at the Paris WTO meeting, lies in deeper, deconcentrated and more diversified global value chains achieved by bringing more countries and more communities from the margins of the global economy to the mainstream. And with that, lady, it is absolutely fantastic that you're here, that you're going to share your thoughts with us on, of course, critical raw materials. But maybe you can also link your thoughts to what's going on, to the Global Gateway. And ladies and gentlemen, every speaker, even high-ranking as you are, Mrs., could you go up on stage with an applause? No applause, no speech. Yes, the steps are somewhat hidden there.
Well, thank you very much. You've taken me by surprise because I didn't know I was going to be the first speaker. And you have to bear with me. I was told to speak for 15 minutes. So, Excellencies, I've been asked to address the role of trade in building sustainable and resilient value chains. But let me begin first by thanking the European institutions, and in particular President von der Leyen, Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen, and my friend Commissioner Thierry Breton, who is here. I'm really excited to see all my younger brothers, the vice presidents from the continent, from DRC, from Rwanda, the ministers, excellencies. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm honored to be here to share some thoughts on critical materials and minerals and the role for global trade and the WTO in building sustainable, secure, and resilient supply chains that support the clean energy transition. Our collective pathway to stay within the 1.5-degree objective will quite literally be made up of critical minerals. Lithium, cobalt, and nickel are essential for the batteries that are needed for the shift from fossil fuels to renewable electricity. Rare earth elements are used for magnets, vital for the most energy-efficient machines. The net zero transition doesn't just require trillions of dollars per year in financing for investments in building renewable energy capacity and in increasing energy efficiency. It requires a lot of critical minerals. For instance, according to the IEA, electric vehicle batteries require 6 times more critical minerals than their fossil fuel-powered equivalents. Increased demand has been met with higher supply. Exports of critical minerals have increased by 46% over the past 4 years, reaching $320 billion in 2022. But this is just the beginning. So allow me to make 4 points about how we can use the critical raw materials scale-up to pursue a just energy transition whilst making economies more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. And this is what we call re-globalization at the WTO. We see the ability to diversify supply chains into areas that were left out during the first wave of globalization, countries that were at the margin or poor regions of rich countries, bringing them in by setting up and diversifying supply chains. There is another way of reimagining supply chains, making them more inclusive. And I hope that what we are going to talk about today is another version of that re-globalization that we talk about. So the first point I'd like to make is that diversification is necessary to ensure a swift and secure energy transition for all. Midstream supply chains that convert raw minerals into refined supplies remain heavily concentrated, even as resource-rich countries look to move up the value chain and consuming countries seek to diversify sourcing. The International Energy Agency has documented over 100 policy and regulatory measures affecting critical raw materials, including import and export restrictions that could fragment markets and make concentration worse. As we have learned over the past 3 years, excessive concentration is bad for resilience. It makes supply chains brittle, unable to cope with shocks, whether caused by extreme weather events, a pandemic, or even the shutdown of a single key production facility. Supply disruptions can lead to price spikes that upend production and discourage much-needed investment. And frankly, excessive concentration makes trading relationships easier to weaponize for geopolitical or other purposes. Our latest flagship research publication, the World Trade Report 2023, spells out the risks of fragmentation and the benefits of diversification. Diversification is about more than simply bringing new raw material suppliers into the value chain as new reserves are discovered. You've all heard the line about how even rare earths aren't all that rare. It also means diversifying every step of the mineral value chain, including processing and manufacturing. Diversification would bring benefits along multiple dimensions. Consider the African continent, which represents 12% of world exports of raw critical materials, but only 3.8% of processed ones. The continent holds a large share of resources critical for the clean energy transition. 75% of total world resources of cobalt and 68% of manganese, according to a recent World Bank report, along with considerable stocks of graphite and lithium. And these figures probably understate the reality, given that subsoil assets on the continent remain significantly underexplored compared to other regions. Going beyond extraction to do more value addition and processing on the continent would diversify the global critical mineral supply base, making it more resilient and better equipped to support the scaling up necessary to meet net zero targets. Just as importantly, it would help boost and transform Africa's trade. Africa has remained primarily a raw materials and commodities exporter, with a small and stagnating share of world trade of about 3%. Doing more processing within African countries would boost economic growth, boost value addition, and job creation. And more jobs and better jobs for young people is what Africa needs to keep its human resources on the continent and decrease pressures for irregular migration out. I want to note that the EU has been moving to invest in critical raw materials in developing countries. The partnerships in Namibia, Kazakhstan, and Argentina are cases in point, with projects under discussion for green hydrogen, lithium, and other minerals, at least some of which would involve processing and refining. And that leads me to my second point, which is that trade is a key part of the solution for building sustainable, resilient, and diversified value chains in the critical mineral sector. A secure, open, and predictable trading environment anchored in WTO rules is crucial for giving businesses the confidence to invest. You would think twice before building a lithium ion ore processing plant somewhere if you weren't sure that your products would be able to get into target markets. In addition to facilitating a conducive environment for investment, trade is a critical means of facilitating access to new technologies that can optimize extraction, improve product design and end-of-life processes, or reduce energy and water requirements in extraction and processing. All of this promotes the more efficient use of minerals. Illegal mining and cross-border smuggling are alarming trends that are picking up speed. The WTO framework is designed to address such concerns and equip members with the tools necessary to combat illegal and illicit trafficking and trade. Our trade facilitation agreement, which encourages the digitalization of customs procedures, is one important tool as it increases transparency and reduces opportunities for fraud. Technical assistance and capacity support would help developing countries fight illicit trade in the sector. There is also additional scope for investment for trade to help move developing countries up the critical minerals value chain, to catalyze investment, enhance access to specialized skills and technological expertise, and leverage regional economic integration initiatives, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, to build value chains that spread the gains across multiple countries. A prospective agreement at the World Trade Organization on investment facilitation, which we are pushing to get adopted by our 13th Ministerial Conference next February in Abu Dhabi, would also encourage more inward investment into developing countries by lowering bureaucratic and other impediments that increase investment costs. About 120 of our WTO members are negotiating this important agreement, of which 80 are from developing countries. Investment in the critical mineral sector will require substantial investment in energy supplies, so an inviting investment environment is a must. We also need better trade data and market information for the critical mineral supply chain. The WTO can play a role here too. We shone a spotlight on trade in vaccines, inputs, and other medical essentials during COVID-19. The WTO is part of a consortium of international agencies behind the Agricultural Market Information System, which assesses global supplies of key staple foods to foster greater market transparency and enable policy coordination to respond to uncertainty. It's not difficult to make the case for an analogous mechanism to the EMIS for critical materials. My third point is that for all the opportunities that the critical mineral sector presents, seizing them in an environmentally and socially responsible fashion comes with big challenges, but is a must. Even as we tackle the climate emergency, we cannot sacrifice biodiversity, pollute our planet, or disregard the livelihoods of communities. The World Wide Fund for Nature recently highlighted that mining impacts affect up to 1/3 of global forest ecosystems. The energy transition must also be people-centered and inclusive. Too often, extractive activities ignore the rights, the health, and economic well-being of surrounding populations. I can tell you from first-hand experience of extractive investments on the African continent, including in my own country, Nigeria, how lovely homes, schools, and health facilities are built for expatriates and their families working in extractive industries, while surrounding communities wallow in darkness and poverty, with no electricity, decent schools, or health clinics. Governments can be complicit by not negotiating or insisting on the need for socially conscious investment. We all therefore have a responsibility to ensure good environmental, social, and corporate governance in critical mineral value chains everywhere, as the Global Gateway pledges to do, and this is one of the strong points of the Gateway. Specifically, we should seek to leverage investments and trade to incentivize improvements in the environmental and social performance of extraction and processing. We want higher volumes of minerals produced in accordance with human rights, child labor laws, worker health and safety, good management of water, air, soil, and waste, along with financial transparency, anti-corruption, and legal compliance. The international community must stand ready to support this approach. We must also deal with the knowledge asymmetries which result when extractive industry firms negotiate contracts with high-priced teams of lawyers that developing country governments negotiating with them cannot afford. My fourth and final point is circularity. That is, closing resource loops for critical minerals is a powerful and underexploited solution for increasing environmental sustainability and supply security. Circularity, which amounts to sustainably using, recycling, and reusing critical minerals as long as possible, is particularly relevant, given that these materials are of high value and the extraction, processing, and use affects the planet's climate, environmental, and underlying resource base. Renewable energy has one big supply security advantage over fossil fuel energy. Once a solar module or a windmill is in place, it doesn't need constant replenishment of oil, gas, or coal. The energy comes from the sun and wind. Recycling critical materials reduces risks of supply shortages. But for circularity to work, we need to improve reverse supply chains and find ways to differentiate secondary resource materials from waste. Too many of our valuable and scarce resources are going to waste. We need more transparency and a better understanding of trade flows of embedded critical minerals in e-waste. Developing countries in particular need better waste management and recovery capacity. Realizing the potential for circularity requires attention to product design, traceability, and sustainable management processes. Moving towards global standards instead of the current plethora of standards and initiatives would support companies' sustainability efforts, enabling greater scale and trade. The WTO is one logical forum in which to pursue convergence, and indeed, a group of WTO members have been exploring how to better leverage the trading system to promote more circularity in production and consumption. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by stating something that might be obvious. No country will achieve self-sufficiency in critical minerals mining and processing, at least not if we are to scale up the production and development and deployment of green technologies to meet net zero imperatives. Building more resilient global supply chains will require countries, companies, and other stakeholders to cooperate on standards, trade, and in other areas. My plea to you is to avoid fragmentation and instead to use trade policies, trade partnerships, and the WTO as a forum for transparency and dialogue to support a just, equitable, and inclusive transition. The preamble to the Marrakesh Agreement that formally established the WTO describes trade as a tool for creating jobs, enhancing living standards, and supporting sustainable development. As we seek to meet the financial and material challenges of the green transition, we have an opportunity to use trade in critical minerals to help all countries emerge as winners, whilst ensuring that the planet wins as well. Let's all seize this opportunity. I thank you for your attention.
Madam, thank you very much for that all-encompassing keynote that you've just shared with us. And we take into our conversation later on more processing and more jobs in the countries where mining is taking place. Of course, also keeping the three other points in mind. And also the one point, we're not talking about supply chains, we're talking about value chains in this new conversation. By the way, this, ladies and gentlemen, would not have been possible without raw materials from the country of our next keynote speaker. The one success is one thing, but the other success will be coming about. We all know that the DRC is rich in deposits of critical and also other mining products. And it's absolutely fascinating if you look at the range of things they actually get out of the earth. I could probably do round about 40 different things. And I think I'm just getting, and please, ladies and gentlemen, this is happening in an international environment, and we do have planes that leave. Sir, may I ask you for 5 minutes so that the EU Commissioner can actually catch his plane to Paris or his train to Paris? Is there any chance you'd be willing to give your place to Thierry Breton, and then I'll do the introduction to you one more time? Is that okay? That is very, very kind. Monsieur Breton, I think in German we'd say, I've got something good. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we are changing protocol because this man really is sitting on, as we'd say, hot coals. You have just mentioned the fact that the fourth point is reuse, recycle, and do your job. This man stands for all of that because the EU has had many different aspects in the last couple of years. However, Monsieur Breton, it's your speech now. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for the running change.
Thank you. And thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Diane Ngouzi. So happy to see you again. No, to Paris, it's not a plane, it's a train. Just to make sure that everybody understands that we are... Thank you. No, it's really a great pleasure, and I know that we started a little bit late, so thank you very much for organizing this way. But I wanted to tell you in few words what we're doing here at the Commission, and maybe with three very short points. First, as you know, we have launched in March this year a very comprehensive legislative initiative to build EU, I will speak first on EU, and then I will speak at large, of course, EU manufacturing capacities. Of course, we are committed to do also our part, to do what we have to do. And we have critical raw materials, of course, in Europe, but of course we want to extract them while respecting what we want to do in Europe and also what we would like to propose outside of Europe. So we have first objectives. Our objectives are very clear. At least 10% of everything we can do in terms of mining will be done, and extraction should be done by 2030 in Europe. 40% of our EU's annual consumption for processing should be done in Europe, and 15% of the EU annual consumption for recycling. But no, we don't want to produce, of course, everything here. Absolutely not. In fact, we are very committed to work with, of course, all our partners and to diversify and integrate also our supply chains. And this is why, and this is my second point, we are building a long-term relationship with these resource-rich countries, and a lot of them are here today, and I would like to salute them. We have launched at the EU level 6 strategic partnerships most recently with Namibia, Kazakhstan, Argentina, Chile, and I am now very, very happy to confirm that we are concluding new partnerships tomorrow with the Democratic Republic of Congo. We were here a few months ago, you remember, it was very, very important, and also with Zambia. Furthermore, I'm pleased to announce that we have also just agreed to engage in view of a partnership with Uzbekistan. And I think you will be able to speak later on this, and we are doing this, let's say, the European way. In other words, where our partners can develop local value added, we want to help them to do this. on the entire raw material value chains. That is really the spirit I wanted to share with you of our global gateway strategy that we wanted to explain today. And third, partnerships are more and more than, of course, a simple piece of paper. They are the guarantee of concrete investment on off-take agreements. In other words, it means, of course, business at large. One good example is also our work with Namibia. Yesterday, we endorsed a roadmap, a very coherent roadmap of concrete industrial projects, for instance, for gallium or germanium, that will benefit, of course, both from the EU and, of course, to create added value in Namibia. Other examples are lithium extraction investment in Argentina, cobalt refinery in Canada, or even natural graphite projects in Ukraine. So, as you see, this is not the beginning. This is only the beginning. We have a lot of things to do together, but again, our way is to do it while reinforcing our supply chains and also helping the mining countries to keep and to enhance added value. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breton, and safe travels. And with that, once again, with many thanks, and I had already started the moderation into you, and remember, whatever phone you have, you certainly have purchased a small part of the DRC, but maybe it's just a milligram. So I think I could repeat my moderation. All I can say is congratulations. Tomorrow morning you'll be signing the partnership agreement, and we're very much looking forward to your keynote that you've prepared. And with that, I'd like to roll out, and the DG has already said it's not red, but just imagine it's a red carpet leading up to the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Sama Lukonde Kyenge, Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Sir, take it away.
Voilà, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je me sens particulièrement honoré de prendre la parole ce jour devant cette auguste assistance au nom de Son Excellence Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, président de la République démocratique du Congo, que je représente à cette cérémonie, qui marque d'un cachet spécial cet événement de si haute portée qu'est le Forum Global Gateway 2023, organisé sous le thème « Partenariat sur les chaînes de valeur durables des matières premières critiques et stratégiques ». La rencontre de ce jour est l'expression de l'intérêt que porte l'Union européenne à l'égard de l'initiative République démocratique du Congo, République sœur de Zambie, sur la chaîne des valeurs des batteries et véhicules électriques. Et comme on l'a annoncé, ici, nous serons bien sûr fiers d'avancer dans ce protocole d'accord avec l'Union européenne. Je dois rappeler que plusieurs rendez-vous pris à l'issue d'une série de contacts, dont le plus décisif fut le grand panel République démocratique du Congo, Union européenne, animé à Lubumbashi en date du 14 juin 2023, en marge de la DRC Mining Week. Il s'en est suivi, à Kinshasa, des travaux en commission interinstitutionnelle en vue de l'élaboration et de l'harmonisation du projet de protocole de partenariat stratégique entre la RDC et l'Union européenne sur les matières premières critiques. La rencontre de ce jour augure l'avènement d'un partenariat durable, gagnant-gagnant, sur les chaînes de valeur des dites matières premières, soutenant les transitions énergétiques, numériques et écologiques. Nous ne le dirons jamais assez, la République démocratique du Congo s'offre comme pays solution aux défis du réchauffement climatique de la planète et meilleure destination des investissements pour la fabrication des batteries et des véhicules électriques. Meilleure destination, pourquoi cette affirmation? Elle découle des résultats de l'étude menée par le cabinet Bloomberg, qui stipule que l'installation d'une usine de 10 000 tonnes de précurseurs de batteries à manganèse, nickel et cobalt coûte 117 millions de dollars actuellement aux États-Unis, 112 millions de dollars en Chine et 65 millions de dollars en Pologne, alors qu'elle ne coûterait que 39 millions de dollars américains en République démocratique du Congo. Et cela pour des raisons évidentes. Premièrement, la main-d'œuvre et la jeunesse qu'offre la République démocratique du Congo à côté de son potentiel de notre pays, qui dispose d'un sous-sol garni de la totalité des minéraux essentiels à la mobilité électrique à laquelle aspire l'Europe d'ici 2035. Spécialement, le cobalt, dont la RDC fournit à elle seule 70% de la production mondiale annuelle, extraite en majeure partie dans le Lualaba. 2. Le lithium, dont la plupart des grands réservoirs nationaux se trouvent dans le Tanganyika. 3. Le nickel, localisé en quantité suffisante dans le Kasaï central. 4. Le cuivre, dont la RDC est le meilleur détenteur en Afrique, minerai auquel s'identifie l'ex-Katanga. Et enfin 5. Le manganèse avec un grand gisement dans le Lualaba. Un autre minerai stratégique de la RDC et dont elle est fière de posséder est le coltan, avec 60% des réserves mondiales. Il est estimé et disséminé dans l'espace du Kivu. Cette précieuse roche est prisée dans la technologie de l'ordinateur et de la technologie cellulaire, surtout en cette ère du développement de la 5G. Et c'est pour ça qu'on vous montrait tout à l'heure cet appareil cellulaire et que tous ici dans la salle possèdent du fait de ce minerai critique qu'est le coltan à côté des autres que j'ai mentionnés. Mesdames et messieurs, situé au cœur de l'approvisionnement des substances minérales stratégiques, la RDC a mis en place un plan stratégique d'exploration reparti en 6 blocs géographiques en vue de découvrir et certifier de nouveaux gisements. Car pour développer ces gisements, il faut d'abord en avoir le potentiel. Et c'est ici le lieu de vous inviter, chers partenaires européens, à orienter également vos investissements dans la réalisation de ce plan stratégique d'exploration, important pour la République démocratique du Congo. Le vœu des peuples africains et même de l'humanité tout entière est de voir s'intensifier et se densifier les partenariats à travers le monde autour du projet de la chaîne de valeur des batteries et des véhicules électriques portés par la RDC et la Zambie. À ce jour, au niveau de la RDC, je peux vous affirmer que nous avons entamé la mise en œuvre de ce projet par des actions concrètes que je me permets de vous citer ici. Premièrement, la signature en avril 2022 d'un accord de coopération à Lusaka entre la RDC et la Zambie en vue de développer une zone économique spéciale transfrontalière devant abriter des usines de production des précurseurs des batteries et véhicules électriques. La création du Centre africain d'excellence pour la recherche et l'innovation sur les batteries. 3. La création depuis février 2023 du Conseil congolais de la batterie. 4. L'accord cadre en mars 2023 relatif à la création des zones économiques spéciales, à la production des précurseurs des batteries et véhicules électriques entre la République démocratique du Congo et la Zambie. Et enfin 5. La mise à disposition des nouveaux espaces pour abriter la future zone économique spéciale. Et c'est dans ce contexte que la République démocratique du Congo reconnaît à sa juste valeur l'intérêt de l'Union européenne, que l'Union européenne plutôt accorde à la question du partenariat sur les chaînes de valeur durables et des matières critiques stratégiques, notamment la loi sur le climat fixant le cadre des mesures visant à atteindre la neutralité climatique à l'horizon 2050, la réglementation de 30% des dépenses que l'Union européenne consacrera aux projets liés au climat jusqu'en 2027. Face à cet engagement, je ne doute pas que l'initiative de la RDC bénéficiera de l'implication directe de l'Union européenne qui n'hésitera pas à mobiliser ses capitaines d'industrie. À côté de cela, nous voulons encourager la coopération sud-sud, au-delà de celle que nous avons aujourd'hui avec la République sœur de Zambie. Nous pensons qu'il y a encore plus de potentialité de coopération. Je peux citer à titre d'exemple aujourd'hui le Gabon avec son manganèse, l'Afrique du Sud avec le charbon. Nous avons le Madagascar, un peu plus loin, qui offre aussi des potentialités en nickel. Nous avons déjà des intentions d'usines de développement de véhicules électriques au Maroc, en Algérie, et nous pensons qu'il y a aussi là un potentiel de collaboration qui peut permettre vraiment un véritable potentiel et même une réalisation de valeurs de chaînes ajoutées en République démocratique du Congo et en Afrique en général. Et point de besoin de rappeler que la RDC regorge d'un immense potentiel énergétique. Car comment aller vers ce développement industriel sans énergie? Le potentiel que nous avons est capable de répondre aux besoins mondiaux. C'est dans ce cadre que nous restons ouverts à des partenariats gagnant-gagnant pour la construction du barrage hydroélectrique Grand Inga. Mesdames et messieurs, en conclusion, je voudrais associer ma voix, en tout cas celle de la République démocratique du Congo, telle que d'ailleurs mentionnée ce matin par la Première ministre du Bangladesh, à la douleur des peuples du monde, victimes des graves crises survenues au cours de ces 3 dernières décennies. Il s'agit de la pandémie Covid-19 et ses effets sur la population du monde, la guerre en Ukraine et récemment ses attaques en Israël. Et enfin, je voudrais, du haut de cette tribune, rappeler la crise oubliée de la République démocratique du Congo, victime, et nous ne cesserons jamais de le dire, de l'agression rwandaise depuis bientôt plusieurs années. Cette situation, lourde de conséquences, condamne plusieurs millions de femmes et enfants, jeunes et vieux, à se replier dans des camps de déplacés. Et près de millions de jeunes, des enfants, des garçons, des jeunes filles ne peuvent plus retrouver le chemin de l'école à la suite de cette crise. Une crise qui, ce n'est plus un secret pour personne, est motivée par des exploitations illicites et illégales des minerais stratégiques et critiques, dont le coltan, le lithium, la cassitérite, le wolframite, que l'on trouve à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Et nous pensons que cette agression, comme toute autre, devrait attirer l'attention de l'Union européenne et du monde entier en général. Car sans la paix, l'ambition que nous voulons tous de construire ensemble cette architecture de chaînes de valeur développée, bénéfique pour tous, ne serait qu'un leurre. Je voudrais ici, avant de terminer, encourager les questions climatiques sur lesquelles nous défendons aussi là ce combat, de manière à ce que les investissements viennent compenser tous les efforts qui sont faits par les pays contributeurs à la baisse du réchauffement climatique à moins de 1,5 degré. Voilà, je vous remercie tous pour votre attention. Et si j'ai pris quelques minutes de plus, comprenez que c'était la concession que j'ai faite tout à l'heure quand même, en toute sportivité. Comprenez que je pouvais prendre quelques minutes de plus. Merci, madame.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you so much for that very insightful and broad speech and the input that you've given us. And good luck for tomorrow. I hope you have your pen ready. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just have a quick look at your watches and at mine, because remember we started at 5:15, so I'd be thinking we use our 90 minutes for the discussions, and therefore we will probably end at 6:45. If anybody needs to run off, please do so, but I would actually like to give our high-level panel chance to share their experiences with us. And Ursula von der Leyen said today it's tales of hope that she was going going to share with us, but I think we are going to be sharing tales of reality now. And I'd like to do that with a wonderful panel. So let me just quickly bring them up on stage. Dr. Situmbeko Kozotwane, would you mind coming up on stage? And I just have to have a quick look where you're supposed to sit. This seat is allocated for you, sir. Right. Right, it's in a very tiny writing, so thank you very much, sir, for being with us. And I know that you already have your pen ready for the signing tomorrow as the Republic of Zambia, and you're the Minister of Finance and National Planning for the Republic of Zambia, is also signing a strategic partnership agreement tomorrow. I'd like to bring up Thomas Alwindo, Minister of Mining from Namibia, a gentleman who has been very busy these last 2 days because there was a Namibian-European conference, a forum, business forum. And let me have a quick look. Yes, also in the middle, and you found your name. Thank you very much, sir. You'll be sharing a little bit of that experience and, of course, the experience with an already existing and working partnership. I'd like to bring up next Alfonso Duranzo, and he's the governor of Sonora, and who in this room might not know where Sonora is. It is not just a province in Mexico, but the province in Mexico when it comes to mining. And sir, may I ask you to come onto this seat. And last but not least, we have a last-minute addition, and it is Zhuxibek Kazbekov. He is the Deputy Minister for Ecology of the Republic of Uzbekistan, has just stepped off the plane, and as we have seen that Mr. Breton is on the train, you have come off the plane just in time. So let's, oops, sorry, sir. Let's now get into the reality of things. And I think I've already mentioned that Zambia is bringing the partnership agreement. We've just heard from the Prime Minister that there is a mutual agreement between Zambia and the DRC on batteries. So could you share your experience, the run-up to the partnership agreement, but also what do you expect that is going to bring to the Zambian experience in mining? Thank you, sir. It's working, it's working.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Your question is what do you expect? And also to clarify on the experiences that we've had. I think the experiences has largely been explained by the Prime Minister when he was talking. We've agreed that we need to work together to establish a car battery industry. The rest is the logistics of how that is done. He's mentioned the special economic zone, the feasibility studies that are being taken. So I think that is set in motion. What do we expect? Firstly, we ourselves have to create an environment that is conducive to private sector, to bring in the capital, to bring in the management expertise, to bring in the marketing channels. So that is our responsibility, and I think we are working on that. On the part of EU colleagues in Europe, our expectation, you have said it, many other people have said it, but I'm going to say it again. Flexibility and acceptance that we move away from the old system of extracting materials out of Africa, process somewhere else, and leave the Africans out of this. I think it's easier said here, but in reality, we may face a bit of pushback in certain quarters. But colleagues, I think it was Ngozi who said, You leave out of this, thinking that the jobs must come here. Just know that the Africans will come here and look for those jobs, destabilizing your societies. And there's no need for the Europeans to fear that the jobs will be taken out. The reason is simple. You do more value addition, you create more jobs in Africa, you create higher incomes in Africa, our pockets will be full, and I'm sure this will also be a win-win solution for you, because with the money in our pockets, I'm sure there will be so many things that you make here in Europe and America that we can buy from you, which we shall not be producing. So this is a win-win situation, but it requires a transformation of the mindset from the old ways of doing things to the new ways of doing things. So that is my biggest expectation.
Thank you very much, and I might want a little bit more of a deep dive later on, so that we can also know not just where the pain points are, but where the future might lie in things that you can live with. And with that, I'd like to look at Thomas Alwindo. As I said, you've been quite busy. The EU Namibian Business Forum that has taken place the last 2 days will probably have given you some more insight, if you ever needed it, into the way that potential financial investments are being brought into your country. But the partnership agreement has now been in play ever since COP27. So you might actually want to share a little bit of your experience on that side. And sir, we'd love to listen to your answer, to your insights.
Thank you very much. Just to say yes, we have been having the Namibia EU Business Forum for the last 2 days. And the discussion during that forum is really about Namibia's contribution to the climate change in terms of us producing green hydrogen. Because we have got all the ingredients, we've got the resources that you need, either whether it's wind or whether it's solar, we've got plenty of land, we got water that we can desalinate actually to produce green hydrogen. So that is the one of the most, the focus I think we've been having since yesterday, sharing that with the potential investors from Europe. And on green hydrogen, just also to say, we actually have done a lot already. We have already got projects that are ongoing. We've got about 4 projects producing green hydrogen. So we're basically just recapping where we are and what we still need to do and what more investment we need to have. And especially also with regard to the Gateway, it's a good opportunity, it's a good initiative, because we know for example, that the production of green hydrogen is a new thing. The market might not be that well established. The pricing mechanism is not exactly what you have in other markets. And therefore, the financing part is a very important discussion that we've had this morning. We also obviously talk about the critical minerals. That is the subject of this session. And you will not be surprised that I echo the same sentiment as from my colleague from Zambia, to say, yes, we do have these critical raw minerals that are essential for the sustainability of the energy transition that we're talking about. You need to have these minerals to use in all sorts of things. And we are then saying, we can understand why there's a concern about the sustainability of the supply of these minerals, especially if they might be available in certain regions of the world and maybe not in others, and therefore those who might not have it, they will be, I guess, rightly so worried about the supply of those minerals. We would not want to hold the minerals for ourselves. We don't want to do that. Especially now they are needed for something that we all need globally. all what we are saying is that those minerals should mean much more to us, especially from us, from the global south. And the history we have in terms of minerals is not probably a good history for us. And therefore, we are now also becoming anxious to say, now that we've got something that everybody wants, are we going to repeat what happened in the past? Are we likely then to have people coming and get these minerals and go back to their countries and do whatever they want to do, and then we are left with nothing? So that's really a serious concern that we have to say. We want to have these minerals to make them available, but they have to mean something for the Africans. They have to mean something for the Namibian people. We need to create livelihood with those minerals for our own people. And for us, it's rational, but we get surprised sometimes also when we hear people, when we demand that there must be value addition within the countries, then we hear people saying, well, that is akin to resource nationalization. These are bad economic policies, and therefore that's not good for us. That's not really helpful. I mean, if you really can just understand to say, if we're really going to have this, I can even link this to what we talk about, the just transition. What will be more just if Namibia can, DRC or Zambia, if we can produce the batteries and export those batteries, wouldn't that be really just transition? That would be really just. And therefore, that's all what we are asking to say. If we are going to have a win-win outcomes from this, let's meet each other halfway and to make sure then that those minerals in some of our countries mean much more to our citizens than it might have, in the past. That is really, I think, the insight we can share with the audience.
Thank you very much. I will be hoping that we have a second round here, and then, of course, invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to participate in the discussion. And with that, I'll turn to Alfonso Durazo, Governor of Sonora. And I've already explained, not just the second largest state of the country, but the most important as far as critical and raw materials are concerned. And basically, you have a plan. And it's always good to have a plan. Could you share with us what you have developed for the next 10 years for the state, and also in how far that might tie in with the Global Gateway and also with the partnerships that are already being established?
Muy bien. Si me permiten, mi respuesta sería en español. Bueno, decirles a ustedes que el plan...
Need one more. I'm sorry, could you just hold on 1 second? We need one more. Okay, fine. We don't need one more. Please go ahead.
Sí, ya. Ok. Bueno, primeramente decirles que el Plan Sonora de Energía Sostenible nace con el propósito de impulsar la transición energética en México y contribuir de esa manera a la lucha contra el cambio climático. Está centrada fundamentalmente en la generación de energía fotovoltaica, aprovechando que el estado de Sonora se encuentra ubicado en una de las franjas de mayor intensidad solar del mundo, y en el aprovechamiento de minerales críticos, particularmente litio. Sonora cuenta con el mayor yacimiento de litio en México, y es en ese sentido que tiene una vinculación muy importante con los objetivos de Global Gateway. En el caso particularmente de litio, busca la explotación y aprovechamiento de este mineral, pero como sucede en otros países, pretende también que todos estos materiales críticos reciban un valor agregado. El estado de Sonora es el principal productor minero de México, produce el 35% de los recursos mineros de nuestro país y buscamos que con este valor agregado generar mayor bienestar en las comunidades, particularmente donde se encuentran asentados estos yacimientos minerales, y acercar también la cadena de proveeduría a las distintas instancias de producción. Contempla un extenso programa de infraestructura, particularmente carretera y portuaria, que dará mayores garantías, mayor eficiencia en el intercambio comercial con México, con Sonora, pero en general a nivel mundial. Y contempla, para no extenderme mayormente, la formación de talento humano, que permitirá satisfacer las demandas de la industria, particularmente de la nueva industria asociada a la transición energética, y nuevamente ahí tenemos un punto de convergencia con Global Gateway. Gracias.
Just one sentence, maybe. You don't just sort of look at the EU. Quite obviously, you look at sort of Northern America, with two big states. Of course, Canada has enough raw materials, the US. So how do you make decisions on who to partner with?
Bueno, tenemos varias posibilidades. Efectivamente, como dice aquí un colaborador presente, somos parte de Latinoamérica, pero también somos parte de Norteamérica. Tenemos una frontera de 600 kilómetros con Estados Unidos. México es un país soberano. Está obviamente en términos comerciales con una intensidad creciente en el intercambio comercial con Estados Unidos, con Canadá y con todos los países del mundo. Tenemos 14 tratados comerciales, pero es un país totalmente soberano. No hay en ese sentido ninguna posibilidad de inducir sus propias decisiones. Tenemos la posibilidad de asociarnos con particulares para el aprovechamiento de esos materiales críticos, a condición de que establezcan su cadena de valor en el estado de Sonora. Y puede también trabajarse en algunos casos mediante concesión, particularmente en el caso de la construcción de infraestructura carretera, participar en asociación con el propio Estado mexicano, con el gobierno de Sonora, o bien recibir una concesión para la explotación de esa infraestructura.
Thank you very much. And there you also see the differences in the length of languages, that one has to keep the headphone on a little bit longer. Thank you very much for that answer. And of course, the Global Gateway projects are supposed to be on eyesight, on eye height, and also not exclusive. So, of course, diversification is one of the big aspects pushed forward. And I'd like to run that later on by our participants from Zambia and from Namibia. But now let's turn to you. First of all, thank you very much for hopping onto the plane and coming here. Uzbekistan is in the early days of looking for partnership agreements. So what made you decide that that is a road that you would want to go? What is in it for you, and what do you think is going to enhance? And I think the same issue that we hear, like sort of bringing home semi-production or production and not just supplying minerals, might be one thing, but I don't want to preempt your answer.
Thank you, Connie, for the floor. First of all, I would like to mention that Uzbekistan and the European Union cooperation is, for us, it's very strategic. So that's why it's very important. It is well developing, very dynamic right now. Only this year, 2 meetings and the heads of our states, our president and Charles Michel met in Chopanata in Kyrgyzstan in June, September in New York. This political leadership and then support to bilateral relations give the basis for this kind of specific cooperation. So I would like to mention that especially 2 days ago in Luxembourg, there were like a ministerial meeting, EU Central Asia meeting. So they adopted a roadmap on improving the cooperation to the next level, bringing to the next level, which was, this roadmap was initiated by our president in Chopanata. And the second one is in the first half of this today, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Bakhtiyor Saidov met with executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. So they agreed that both sides will start negotiating on signing a memorandum of understanding on critical raw materials. So we see this as a very important for Uzbekistan's development. As we can see, our country is very eager to develop and economically. So as you said, it's not only just like providing the raw materials or sending raw materials, but also like adding the more value chain, more value to the local context as well. So and also we agreed with the European Union to sign enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement. So soon so that's one aspect. And second one aspect is as a Deputy Minister of Ecology, Environment Protection and Climate Change of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan, this kind of cooperation on critical raw materials will also help us in developing our transition to green economy. We have our ambitions to set for net zero and sustainability goals. So these kind of projects will help also the investments. But we have to make sure that it is from one side, it's extraction from the nature for the nature. So we have to be also thinking about like a value chains in terms of environmental value chains, and in an integrated manner, not dividing like a European side or the countryside. So that's why it's very important to see the whole value chain, whole environmental value chain holistically. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The same question would go to Dr. Muzo Kotwane and to Mr. Alwindo. So both of you have shared experiences, and if I heard correctly, you have a little bit of tummy ache with it all. Like, you know, there have been promises. You are not quite happy with the situation as now because you want more jobs, more finishing. So what do you think is necessary? What needs to happen for your wishes to come true?
Yeah, as I said, the first step is to work together with the Europeans at the government level, at the corporate level, financing levels, and accept that changes must take place. And I know for companies in Europe, of course, no one can persuade a private company to go and make an investment in Africa because it's a private decision. But still, working together, we can remove some of the fears, maybe through the risking, or even the media. Remember, most of the media stories in Europe, out of Africa, normally is about catastrophic situations. Hunger, corruption, coup d'etats, and stuff like that, to the extent that many people here, they find it difficult that in certain areas, when you go into Africa, you may have processes that may be a little bit more advanced than in Europe. So Africa has been painted badly. So we can work together to remove that. Secondly, it's not just about the issue. Secondly, I think this Global Gateway initiative, we must remain committed to it and be real to it. The issue of talking, making promises, and things not happening, that not deliver anything. I'm amazed, for example, we started talking about the Global Gateway 2 years ago. We have, together with Namibia and DRC, we said infrastructure is necessary. Yes, we can invite investors, a lot of copper and so forth to dig out, but we need transportations. And there was an announcement, 130 billion. Immediately we put a proposal on the table. Can we rehabilitate the railway lines to the seas? But there is no clarity of who to talk to, what are the processes. So we are moving around in circles. That must end. Okay? That must be end. It must be very clear and be very decisive. On our side, we must provide transparency, efficiency in the processes, fight corruption, and also use our money more wisely. Because sometimes people say, you see, there are these companies, they invest, but we don't see development. You go to the company, it says, but we pay taxes. What are you doing with the taxes? So it is up to us also to make sure that the money that we get out of this is spent wisely on things that communities appreciate. So change on both sides is important.
Thank you very much for directing us and giving us a couple of issues to work on. Mr. Alwindo, there were also financiers at your conference in the last couple of days, or yesterday and today. Can I be frank and ask you, how did the conversation go?
Yeah, you're going to get a frank answer as well. This is a frank question. But the issue about what needs to change, why we are somehow apprehensive and what must change, don't get me wrong. We're not actually saying this is not a great thing. This is a great thing. In fact, the MOU, for example, that we have signed with the EU last year, it says, yes, we need to have sustainable supply of these critical raw minerals, and we also agree that they must be value added in the country. That's great. But we are saying, sometimes we sign this agreement, but what happens then, at the government level, we have agreed, but at private sector level, because all these things are going to happen through private sector companies. At private sector company level, that message is not appreciated the same way it is appreciated at the government levels. And that's, I think, where we need to start to think about how do we then also convince that the private sector company, the investors, to say, actually, it could well be in the best interest of you actually adding value to these minerals in the country where you are actually producing that. As the Prime Minister from DRC says, if we were to build this factory here, it's going to cost you a fraction than what it will cost you in the US. So if you can start to get that message to say there are actually economic benefit for you to be able to do that, or to do that what actually the agreement says. So the agreements sometimes are quite clear. Like, for example, we have also, when we signed that MOU last year, we have agreed to say, let's work out a clear roadmap on the activity that must be taken place. You know, it could be either skill transfer, it could be the financing issues, it could be building some prototype of some sort of, you know, a project. It's quite clear. But we need to transfer that to the business people who are going to be able to do that. And maybe the other point I want to make, and that was actually what features actually at our business forum, is the financing and how the DFIs, for example, need to go into some of this financing to start to de-risk some of these projects. Because there will be challenges in some of our countries, you know, because people say, oh yeah, but we can't do this because there's no infrastructure here, there's no here. And surely those are challenges. But it's not a good reason to say, and therefore we shouldn't add value within the country. And therefore how the DFIs come into the equation to say, how do we then start actually leveraging some of these resources, financial resources, to de-risk some of these projects. So, but we are not saying there isn't anything happening. We're just saying, you know, sometimes, you know, it's good you sign this agreement. And for example, take for example the globalizations, the way how globalization was promoted, how it's going to be good for everybody. But when you look back now, we actually do realize that actually globalization wasn't for everybody. It did benefit others and did disadvantage the others. And we simply do not want to get into that trap again. You look back 20 years later, and what was actually agreed to or what was promised is actually not what happens. And then our people are going to look at us, look, guys, what did you do? We thought you were going to have a better deal now. That's what happened. So those are really some of the things. Let's just be clear to understand. It's really just going to be a win-win situation if we agree to do that. So, and that has been agreed. The agreement says so. Let's just practically do that as well.
Thank you very much, and for giving my frank question. We know that Werner Hoyer of the European Investment Bank was on a panel just before on green hydrogen, so he can't sort of split himself. And we also know that the issue of transport is just as important as this one, even though, of course, everything is very interconnected. Now, let me just say, or give you a quite quick warning, I'd still like to ask Mr. Durazo and Mr. Kazbekov one more question, and then it's you with your intervention. So maybe a shorter answer this time. We have heard a little bit of the tummy ache and of the need for change, and we've heard the message. Is there something, seeing that you've sort of developed your own environmental plan, your own ecology plan, your own sustainability plan, is there something that might actually be a point of learning, something to be shared from the experience in Sonora? That you could sort of say, you know, we've made this experience and this is the best way to handle problems.
Bueno, primeramente hemos tomado la decisión de darle una relevancia estratégica a la transición energética. Esa sola decisión nos pone a la vanguardia no solo como Estado de Sonora, sino como país frente a uno de los retos fundamentales de la humanidad. Pero al mismo tiempo que nos convertimos o pretendemos convertirnos en vanguardia de la transición energética, se abren oportunidades extraordinarias de inversión íntimamente ligadas a la generación de energías limpias y al aprovechamiento de los materiales estratégicos. ¿Qué podríamos compartir? Que para nosotros es fundamental el dar valor agregado a la producción primaria en general, pero particularmente a la de los materiales críticos. Solamente hay dos maneras de generar bienestar en la población: incrementando la productividad mediante tecnologías o dotando de valor agregado a la producción primaria. Y siendo uno de los objetivos fundamentales del Plan Sonora, la transición energética no es un fin en sí mismo, tiene por objetivo generar bienestar para la población y generar bienestar en lo posible también, obviamente, para la humanidad. Pero en esta generación de bienestar para nuestra población está el valor agregado. Ahí centraría yo la recomendación.
Thank you very much. In a way that sort of reflects what we've heard from Dr. Musso Katwane and Mr. Alwindo. We have been talking about hopes and we've talked about the pathway. Now you're going to get a carte blanche. The only thing is you're not allowed to speak longer than 2 minutes 30.
I will try. I will talk about the homework, what we did. So our president, this rhetoric has changed from economic development, like the first environment, then economic development. And we adopted the strategy of New Uzbekistan 2030, which is 80% of all the activities like green cities, green transport, like digitalization. Everything is really about economic development, but it is about, so I see it the most green strategy. The main focus is human-centered. So this year we updated our constitution. So we have special article about the human right of Uzbekistan to the better environment. Plus on the RLC, you know, the RLC issue, it's like a very global issue, like man-made catastrophe, environment catastrophe. So by the initiative of our president, there was like a special resolution of UN General Assembly about announcing this RLC region as a zone of environmental innovations in the technologies. We are doing in we have more than 5 million hectares of dried bottom of the RLC. So in 1.7 million, about 2 million hectares, we planted saxaul trees to stop these dust storms and etc. We are updating all our legal frameworks on biodiversity, environmental impact assessment, and the standards. So in this regard, we need innovations, science, and capacity building activities to support this kind of initiatives, like a cross-regional, inter-regional initiatives. And we established this year by the president adopted like 4 different decrees of transforming the environment protection system in our country. So we established a Green University for Central Asia. So we see that we don't have like we have one ecosystem for the whole Central Asia, so it doesn't recognize any borders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I have 2 interventions, 2 names already down. I doubt that we have time for more. If you're Kitali Mkumba, then after Jennifer Morgan, she has already put up her hands like half an hour ago. So Jennifer Morgan, State Secretary in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Germany, and the microphone goes to her, please. A short intervention, please, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, and it's just a real pleasure and joy to listen. Because I think that these are exactly the conversations we need to be having. Germany is incredibly committed to inclusive value chains. We are heading very deliberately into the renewable energy future, implementing quite a lot. And so these types of partnerships are a core element of our foreign policy, our trade policy, our economic policy, our climate policy. So, and I think the Global Gateway and also our bilateral work that we're doing together with many of you is really moving forward. So, one thought and then a question. So, but we may not have time for answers to questions. But a thought is that I think one thing that we can be doing together is in the coming months at the upcoming COP is be sending a very clear signal to investors that this is the way forward and it's what they should be investing in. And then through our bilateral and plurilateral partnerships be setting the standards together. So what is it that makes it work for local value creation? What is it that makes it work for you and makes it work for us? And so that's the chance to set a global renewable energy target at this upcoming COP. I mean, the Africa Climate Summit was incredibly important and inspiring there, and working on the finance mechanisms, the job creation mechanisms. And I guess so love to work with you on that, the bilateral, but also this multilateral thing that we all need to be working on together for so many different reasons and the opportunities that come. The question I had was more about what you were saying of linking the other panel, green hydrogen, which is also of great interest, working with many of you on that, and the connection between your domestic energy access and energy transition with green hydrogen and critical raw materials. I know we don't have time for that, but maybe in future conversations we can pick that up. But thank you for the specificity and look forward to getting to work. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the brevity of the intervention. We need the microphone to the second row and to the first row. So the second row is, if my notes don't betray me, Kitila Mkumba, Minister of State for Planning and Investment in Tanzania. Correct?
Thank you. Just 1 minute. I think that I agree with the gentleman from Zambia and Namibia, but also colleagues from Mexico and Abidjan. I think we have lessons. I think this morning the President of the Commission made a very strong point that we have a crisis here, climate change crisis, but she also made a point that we need to change that one into an economic opportunity. I think that is very critical. Now we have the lessons. We know that over the past 50 years, Africa has been producing minerals. And these minerals did not actually help Africa economically. Why? The reason was that because they are being exported in raw stuff. That is the lesson number one. The second lesson, we know that there is no any country in the world which developed economically by exporting raw stuff, be it agriculture, be it minerals. So if you are going to repeat the same mistake, we'll be able to solve the global climate crisis, but we shall never be able to solve the first problem that the President of the Commission mentioned, which is economic growth. So the discussion should not be whether we should do value addition or not. The discussion should be how do we do that, collaborating with our friends in Europe. So I think that should be the emphasis here. Value addition is the point. Thank you.
You will get the microphone under the conditions no longer than 1 minute. Okay, and can I just on the way just share one thing with you? We're always talking about Africa. I'm sorry, 54 different states. You know, we should be a bit more differentiating and not just sort of say Africa. Sir, you've got a microphone.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Edward Ngirente. I'm the Prime Minister of Rwanda. I will just take 1 minute. First of all, I want to thank EU for this conversation. Normally, I think it's the first time we're discussing, the discussion between Europe and Africa about minerals. Having this serious discussion didn't happen before, and we hope it's going to, to pay good fruits because now we're having an open discussion. The second thing is that these MOUs which are being signed between Africa and this European, with the European Union, I'll talk about the processing. This is something which we have been missing, and this is what the Minister of Tanzania has mentioned. We cannot have mining with no processing in Africa. In the end, it becomes a mess. Now we're happy that at least we talk about the whole value chain. Number 3, I'm going to be very short. I want you to react about what the Prime Minister of Congo has said. Unfortunately, he's gone. But he mentioned, because he mentioned the name of my country about the war in Congo, the conflict, I want to clarify with two things. One, the conflict in Congo is an internal conflict, and Rwanda has been supporting the regional initiatives, being in Nairobi, peace process, and the Angola. So we are supporting the peace process, and we're not involved in that war. Second, it looks like he mentioned Rwanda doesn't have minerals. Rwanda will have minerals, and those minerals have been discovered during the colonial period. It was discovered by Belgium when they were occupying Rwanda. The first companies in Rwanda were set up by Belgian colonies during the colonial period. So we have minerals, and what we want is just a good partnership between European Union and us. So there is no such thing of Rwanda going to Congo to steal minerals because they have ours. I wanted to clarify that because the Prime Minister of Congo has mentioned it, even if he's gone, but I want the audience to understand what we have been saying about that process.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Lovely, thank you. No, I'm not going to take that microphone. As we are running out of time, I have one very, very difficult question for you because each and every one of you can hold hours-long speeches. I would like to hear from each and every one of you the one sentence that you want everybody to walk out of the room with, i.e. something that really everybody needs to know, even if you have already mentioned it. So, Dr. Musa Kotwane, and at the end of the moderation, I will actually be able to pronounce your name properly. The one sentence that you want everybody to have heard.
Yes, I said it several times. Mind change in Europe, mind change in Africa. Do things differently.
That would be a wonderful final sentence. However, Mr. Alwindo.
For me, just to say Namibia is ready to work with anyone, especially all those investors who we share the same value, to say we need to have value added to our minerals in order to create a livelihoods in our countries. And therefore, if we share that vision, certainly you are welcome, and in us, you're going to find willing partner who understand what you need, and because you understand what we need as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Duraso.
Bueno, la transición energética es un compromiso moral con la humanidad, pero es también un espléndido negocio.
Gracias. And last but not least, Josipek.
We have just one environment, regardless of your region, your country, or where you are extracting or adding value.
Thank you very much, and I think that deserves a big round of applause. Gentlemen, I would hope that the conversation continues, and I know it will. So maybe you would like to keep your places, but, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the end. But with the applause, maybe you would like to go back to the first row. As I'm calling up, we had Alpha and Omega, and we had a sort of quickly brought in Commissioner Breton at a different place that he should have been. It's been wonderful. Ms. Shusha, you have been here the whole time. You've been listening to the conversation. This is not, gentlemen, it's not the end. Please, we are having one more speech, and it is not going to be a long one that I can share with you. Gentlemen, could you just for 5 minutes bear with us? Yes, that would be really, really nice. Don't drag anybody out. And if you need to go, go now. All right, it was to be expected. We've started at 5:15. I'm very, very sorry. And let me just finish the introduction. Dubravka Šuica has jumped in last minute, and I think she deserves a big round of applause that she's doing that. Special responsibility for democracy and demography and the future of Europe, and therefore also with the future of the partners.
Thank you very much. You must be wondering what I'm doing here, since I'm in charge of democracy and demography. But since my dear colleague, Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis, is sick, so I stepped in his position, and I will try to summarize. I was listening carefully, and there is a lot to take away from this conference, also for my portfolio on demography, because listening to the dear ministers from Africa, it was really worth listening and interesting and taking into account while legislating on demography and while drafting our papers on demography. So thank you very much once again, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, for the rest who is in this room. I want to thank you for contributing to this discussion. So I will offer some thoughts to conclude today's panel. We all know how important critical raw materials are for the green and digital transition, for manufacturing chips, electric vehicles, and renewable energy technologies. For moving to a sustainable and digital society, the main challenge is to make sure that their supply is reliable and sustainable for years to come. This means more investment. This is what we heard in this panel, not only in extraction, but also in refining, processing, and transformation down the value chain. For countries with a rich supply of critical raw materials, such as Namibia, I'm sorry they left, I think, who were represented here today, this is an excellent opportunity. In addition, we know that many resource-rich countries are keen to attract partners to develop their own critical raw materials value chains sustainably. Europe is not a resource-rich continent, all of us know, so our domestic supply will provide only a fraction of the critical raw materials we need. So, along with increasing capacities in the European Union and beyond, we are keen to diversify our imports as a way to make sure of reliable supplies. We are keen to partner with countries that produce these materials, supporting them to develop their refining and processing capacities and to do this sustainable. As a result, they will be in a strong position to move up the value chain themselves, creating local value while working to maintain the sustainability of the entire value chain. This is a very new and European-specific approach. This is what you heard this morning from our president. In fact, I would say that that is better than what other countries can offer. At the same time, just as the European Union does not want to rely on a single supplier, it understands that it is not the only partner for global gateway participants. So let me be clear, the European Union has no ambition to be an exclusive partner, but we are keen to be a special one. And we fully respect the choices of countries to develop with more than one partner. As we reduce our dependence on highly concentrated supplies, we are strengthening our global engagement to develop and diversify investment, production, and trade with reliable partners. To guarantee the right environment for investment, it is essential to have in place a multilateral rules-based system that provides legal certainty and predictability. We can achieve this with WTO and with our bilateral trade agreements as well. Increasingly, the European Union, our agreements contain chapters with dedicated disciplines on energy and raw materials. Recently, we extended and deepened our free trade agreement with Chile, as all of you know, and we hope to do the same with Australia soon. I'm also thinking of enhanced sustainable investment facilitation agreements, where we want to include provisions on sustainable development and on energy on the raw materials. Here, we would establish dialogues to support industrial projects and local value creation. This could be achieved by setting up sectoral priorities and modalities to involve the private sector, what we heard this afternoon. We have started discussions with Nigeria, and other countries may follow. However, trade agreements that stipulate rules should identify and create investment opportunities too. This is what we are doing with the strategic partnerships on critical raw materials. There has been some progress already. We are well on track in our partnership with Namibia after the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding of the COP27. In the margins of this Global Gateway Forum, we will sign, as you heard, new partnerships with Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. I am pleased that we have just agreed to engage on critical raw material partnership with Uzbekistan, who was present also here on this panel. We have also signed strategic partnership with Kazakhstan, Chile, Argentina, and previously with Ukraine and Canada. The European strategic partnerships on raw materials value chain contribute to structural transformation in partner countries. The cooperation model offered by the European Union is based on mutual interest. It is designed to benefit the partner country as well and bring it a competitive advantage in the long run. This is what we were asked here this afternoon. Another key part of our engagement with developing partners, of course, is the Global Gateway, the subject of our forum. It will provide the infrastructure and de-risking tools to support investments efforts in energy, transport, logistics, education, and skills. And it will help to create a business-friendly climate that promotes private sector development. We are developing Global Gateway flagship projects for 2023 with each CRM strategic partnership. Critical raw materials will remain a priority sector for 2024 list of our flagships. But we also need financial institutions on board to finance a specific CRM-related project. This is why the European Union is ramping up coordination with European development finance institutions and export credit agencies. The private sector has singled out environmental, social, and governance risk as a bottleneck for investment. To be clear, the European Union is committed to the highest standards, including a zero tolerance for child labor. This is my portfolio, and we wish to work with our partner countries to achieve this goal. We are supporting several programs such as the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative and the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals. Lately, only few words on CRM Club that we want to create for all interested countries to strengthen global supply chains. Access to a secure, diversified, affordable, and sustainable supply of crucial raw materials is a global challenge that we need to tackle together. We would like to bring reliable partners together to address the challenge of CRM supply and to assist resource-rich countries in their ambition to industrialize and build on these assets. The idea is to work together to boost investment, to create a reliable trade and investment environment, and make sure of sustainability in all its dimensions. We plan to launch the club with founding members by the end of this year. So for those who want to join, you are free to join. To conclude, it will be based on 4 pillars: knowledge sharing and crisis preparedness, boosting sustainable production and local processing capacities, reliable trade and investments in CRMs, and sustainability. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude here. I would like to thank everyone who has taken part in today's panel for their views and on how to address these common challenges, only if we work together. Thank you very much.